Today, we're getting a look at the strongest kingdoms in Rise of Kingdoms. We're going to get a look at their power. We're going to get a look at their T4 and T5 kills. And we're going to get a look at their dead troops to see how much they're really willing to throw down. So whether or not you're just wondering which kingdoms are the strongest, or you're looking for a kingdom to migrate to, stick around in this video for the very best in Rise of Kingdoms. Hello, my friends, and welcome back. I'm Chisgule Gaming, and today's video is sponsored by the makers of Rise of Kingdoms, and a bunch of data for this video was gathered from rockboard.com. Now, I looked at a ton of kingdoms. In fact, I will put later in the video a list of a bunch of kingdoms that you thought maybe should have been on this list, so you can see exactly where they fall by power, kills, and dead troops. But we're going to hone in on the top 5, and there's really 3 rankings, well, technically 4, that we need to look at. And these, again, are stats provided by rockboard.com. Now, the challenge is that rockboard.com scans a bunch of stats for the players that are really in the top 300. The problem here is that it's not looking at the entirety of the kingdom, and these kingdoms are much, much larger, which is why I consulted with Ruz, Teddy, and a bunch of other folks from SW to give you the list that I think belongs in the very best of the best. So the first kingdom we're going to get a look at in today's list is 1647, and they're not quite on the list yet, but they have an opportunity to make the top 5, which is why we're going to talk about them. Now, 1647 is a kingdom that needs to prove itself, and by and large, the only way you make yourself on this top 5 list is by actually beating one of the other kingdoms that's already on the list. Now, 1647 is already in KVK now, but they are poised to potentially take one of these bigger kingdoms on, and then we say maybe they do belong in the top 5. Now, you're watching them battle in Ark of Osiris League as well. They just battled against 1960, which is obviously a very tough fight to take. But we'll get a look through some of the alliances they have here. Samurai is at 15.5 billion power, and they are in the middle of KVK, so they have more slots for players than they normally would, but they also presumably have done some fighting. So you can see they have room for 170 players in their alliance. When we look at their capped power, that means players that are over 150 million power still count at 150 million power only. This is, by the way, how Imperium rules work for migrating into kingdoms and limiting the sort of growth of a kingdom. If we look at the capped power, they're currently number 3. As a kingdom, number 3 by capped power. And if we look at their uncapped power, they are also number 3 for uncapped power. That means players that are over 150 million count at exactly their power number. So, for example, although Baba's not in this kingdom, Baba would count at over 1 billion power, right? Really, really crazy. When we look at the T4 and T5 kill points in this kingdom, they're actually at number 8 in the list, which is really solid. They're a younger kingdom and newer kingdom to the scene. So, yeah, you wouldn't expect them to be quite as high on the list here. We got to look at another one of their alliances at 13.1 billion power. The other number that I think is really, really important is the dead troops number, and this is actually really impressive. At the time of this recording, 1647 is number 5 for dead troops. Now, that is really a way that you prove yourself. So they have definitely thrown down in KVKs. I have, again, allied with them in the past, and they were a very strong kingdom. This is a kingdom to watch for sure. Contender in Ark League, although I don't know how you ever going to beat 1960 GT, but whatever. A contender in Ark League, and also high power, and also throws down for kills. This is a kingdom to watch. But on the topic of kingdoms to watch, let's get a look at the next kingdom in this list. That's 1846. Now, although 1846 is in a lost recovery period, they just battled against 1093 and they lost, and presumably they will recover. If they do recover, you can't discount them from the list of the strongest kingdoms in the game. They are still really, really large, and right now, it's a little difficult to look at their power because they're in the middle of an Imperium drop. They're at the very tail end of their KVK, and they're going to try to get a bunch of new people, presumably, into their kingdom. Now, migrating people in after you lose a couple KVKs in a row is a little bit difficult. Trust me, I would know from personal experience. But when you look at the total number of T4 and T5 kill points they have they were number 4 on the list. And they're number 4 on the list for dead troops. So make no mistake, they are a powerhouse kingdom. And remember, that's just looking at the top 300 players by power. This kingdom is a lot bigger than 300 players. In fact, pretty much every kingdom on this list is. But let's talk about the next kingdom that we need to look out for as the strongest kingdoms in the game, and that is 1960. Obviously, we can't have a conversation about powerhouse kingdoms and rise of kingdoms without talking about 1960, who queues up for literally every single KVK pop they get pretty much as soon as it happens, because they want to get as many iconic crystals as they can as fast as possible. Now, at the time of this recording, they're out of KVK, but at the time the stats were pulled, they still hadn't gotten their troops back from the end of KVK yet. So their power rankings are a little bit difficult for us to really say here. So they're much higher than how they're ranked, which on the sheet I'll show you at the end, they're going to be 25th for capped power and 20th for uncapped power, but that's before troop return from KVK. But when we look at the total T4 and T5 kills that they have in their top 300 by power, well, guess what, baby? 1960 is number 1 on the list, and they're number 3 for dead troops. But remember, this is only looking at the top 300 by power, and the flaw that 1960 has to struggle with is the push-pull of both being a big kingdom versus having really insane stacked top alliances. So this is a kingdom that really has 60 GT absolutely stacked, but they also have one more alliance, 60 MX. Okay, they're at less than 10 billion power. I think this gives you some perspective here. If we look to see 60 KA, isn't this, I think, not quite a farm alliance, but 5 billion power? So I'm not going to call 1960 a one alliance kingdom because I think that's inaccurate. They are a multi-alliance kingdom, but they've only got a couple alliances where I think to really hang in the top tier, you need to have more players. So yes, they are ranked really, really highly. But unfortunately, Rockboard doesn't look at entire kingdoms to give us their stats, which I think would paint a different picture. But when you look at their top players, bro, number 1 on the list for T4 and T5 kill points, and it's impressive. They've got 1.7 trillion kill points. Now, while we're talking about 254, I may as well show you my kingdom here, and 254 has gone the route of making a very large kingdom, having as many players as possible that can all punch really, really hard. I am honestly not trying to be self-congratulatory when I say that our kingdom is one of the strongest in the game. In fact, we're number 4 on capped power, and we're number 2 right now on uncapped power. Now, we're also out of KVK, okay? And we've had a little bit of time to recover, which is a part of the reason that we're looking stronger and stronger. You can see the power of the alliances that we've got here, but 15 billion, 12.5 billion, 12.5 billion, 12 billion, almost 10, okay, 9.5 billion, 8.5 billion. Like, it's a lot of power, and the power is only a piece of the puzzle here. If you look at the alliance kills, I think this is the thing that's more insane. You're looking at 808 billion kill points, 656 billion kill points, 411 billion, 314 billion, 151 billion, even 103 billion in a farm alliance. Although we clock in at number 3 for overall T4 and T5 kill points, we do score number 1 for dead troops, which is pretty impressive. We've got 8.7. God, am I reading this number correctly? Yeah, it's 8.7 billion dead troops. Jesus, man. What a disaster. GG. GG, that's so many dead troops. So yeah, a kingdom's willingness to kill their troops is a pretty big deal. And this is based on the top 300 governors by power. The kingdom is very large. That number goes much, much higher, I think, when you expand to this entirety of the kingdom. In fact, we need to get a look at a couple other kingdoms that also are extremely large. And let's get a look at 1093. Now, if 1093 wasn't included in this list the last time, they may have been a candidate, but now that they've knocked out 1846, yeah, 1093 belongs in the list of the top 5 strongest kingdoms by power in the game, which is pretty wild, man. This is a kingdom that's been around for a very, very long time as a strong kingdom in the game. Some kingdoms sort of rise and then fall, and even 1093 is sort of fallen from their peak strength and then surpassed whatever their strength was previously. And now is, I think, really the strongest they've been in a very, very long time. I mean, this kingdom is on the rise. 1093 just beat 1846, which was a big win for them, showing like, hey, we belong on this list. Like I said, you got to knock somebody off the list to be here. But because the data was collected while they're still at the tail end of their KVK, we can't really look at their power. It's not a very fair assessment here. They are 50th and 54th for capped and uncapped power because they just lost a bunch of troops and they're in the middle of their Imperium drop. But if we look at T4 and T5 kills, they're ranked number 9 in the list. If we look at their dead troop count, they were 11th in the list. So they've got a little bit of work to do on their kill points and their dead troop counts. But again, that's only looking at the top 300 players in the kingdom, and this is a very large kingdom. That is one of their strengths. In addition, the final kingdom that we've got to look at for the top kingdoms in the game is, of course, going to also include 1365. Now, this is the kingdom that I would say, like, when you look at who's closest together in terms of these top kingdoms and the way that they're structured and the way that they're sort of growing, 365 and 254, which is my kingdom, are very, very similar. If we look at the power here, they're 5th for both capped and uncapped power. And if you look at the T4 plus T5 kill points, they actually have more T4 plus T5 kill points than 254. They're number 2 on the list, and they are number 2 on the list for dead troops. This also, by the way, is the home of JST. JST has Ark of Osiris League Championship titles to their name. So this is a extremely strong kingdom that also has a lot of depth. They're just coming off of a KVK and are starting to recover. So they've had a sort of couple weeks less than we have to rebuild their troop strength. But this is also a kingdom that we've got to keep our eye on for what sorts of fights they're going to take next. They've done 3v1. They've done really difficult fights. So who will they fight next is an interesting question. They sort of queued, but then didn't queue for Strife of the Eight in this last pop. We'll see what they ultimately end up taking. We're currently queued up for Heroic Anthem, so we're off cycle for them. But what I want to do now is put a bunch of data on screen, and there'll be several charts that you can get a look at. The first is everything that I've just been talking about for the strongest kingdoms and where they are ranked for power, for uncapped power, T4 plus T5 kill points, and also the dead troops. These are not in any particular order in this chart. And the next thing I want to look at, and I'll put that on the screen, is a chart that is sorted by the capped power of the kingdom. And this includes a ton of kingdoms that you might have been thinking about, like where is 556 in this list? And where is like 1021? That's Blackjack, who just beat 1V. In fact, 1V is 1034. They're on this list. You can get a look through here. I have color-coded these, by the way. If they're colored green, that means that they are currently not in KVK. If they're colored yellow, that means maybe they just entered KVK, or they're even in the middle of KVK and have had some losses. And red means that they are at the end of KVK or are in their Imperium drop phase. So that gives you a sense, by the way, of when this sort of data was pulled. This was on 11/14. This is very important. Remember, the capped power is the top 300 players by power, but if you're over 150 million, we still only count you at 150 million. Then we've got the uncapped, the T4 and T5 kill points, and the dead troops. And this all is sorted, by the way, looking at the top 300 players by power. There are some other kingdoms that are certainly noteworthy that are on this list. In fact, I won't mention all of them because I tried to include a lot of kingdoms so people could see, like, hey, some of these kingdoms I've been looking at, where do they fall on this list? Like Kingdom 2000 is on here, 1307 and 412 are in here. This was recorded, I think, before their Kingsland fight, so I think they're actually going to be much lower on power than is represented here. But 1307 is looking pretty good these days, right? Getting a big win here, although they weren't in the top 5, right? Like 1307 is definitely up there. That's worth mentioning. For those of you wondering, for example, like where Song falls on this list, because they're a pretty strong kingdom. They're in the KVK with 1093. You can see they're 9th, actually, for deaths overall, which is a pretty big deal. 16th for kill points. So I thought this was a pretty cool list to look at. And now what I'll put on the screen in sequence is power, uncapped power, T4 and T5 kills, and the dead troop counts, the actual numbers from Rockboard. The funny thing is that when we look at Imperium power At the time of this recording, 556 has 28.8 billion imperium power, which puts them at the top of the list. Okay, 28.85 billion imperium power, followed by 1484, 1647, and my kingdom, 254, is at 28.3 billion imperium power. 365 is at 27.5 billion imperium power. When we pop the cap off that bad boy, I guess I phrased that kind of funny, but when we pop the cap off there, uncapped power, we're looking at 556 at 31.7 billion uncapped power. This is where Baba counts as his full power, right? 1254 is at 30.2, almost 30.3 billion power. And 1647 is at 29.6 billion power. These numbers are really impressive. 484 is at 29 billion. 365 is at 28 billion power. If we get a look now at the kills and dead troops. Now, the numbers here don't tell the whole story, because remember, we're only looking at the top 300 players by power. So a kingdom like 1960 is at the top of this list, and they should be, because they don't have as much depth as other kingdoms do. But damn, is that number impressive. 1.7 trillion kill points. 365 at 1.5 trillion kill points. And 1254 at 1.4 trillion kill points. 1846 is next, by the way. You see why they're on this list. 1.1 trillion. 1034, that's 1V, is almost 1.1 trillion kill points. That's T4 and T5s. For dead troop counts, this is top 300 players by power. You're looking at 8.7 billion dead troops for 254, 8.5 billion dead troops for 365, 1960s 8.1 billion dead troops, 846 is right up here, man, 7.3 billion dead troops, and 1647, 6.7 billion dead troops. You can see why I was like, yeah, 1647 could belong on this list. 846, we need to see they hold together to remain on this list. And I think those are the two that are really in flux right now. But if you want to see who's going to duke it out next in the next colossal kingdom battle, you should subscribe to the channel, because I will hopefully be a part of it. In 254, that's what we aspire to do, is to find these insane fights and take them. So subscribe if you haven't already. If you enjoyed this video, this is a list I update roughly every 3 months, so you can see how this is unfolded. In fact, if you want to see how things have changed since the last time I made this list, I would encourage you to check out a video. It'll be in the end screen in just a second. And also, we're about to get the formation system. If you haven't been following along with how the formation system works, card will be in the end screen, because you're gonna need to know this stuff probably this week.